Now to the government throwing billions of dollars, remember Fannie Mae and AIG, just to keep them from going under. Yes, known as bailouts, but the saga is far from over, even though several years in our rearview mirror. Fox Business Network senior correspondent Charlie Gasparino.
This is going to be a huge story in a couple of weeks, particularly if Hank Greenberg wins this case. And what we understand is this. As you know, Hank Greenberg is suing the U.S. government over the legality of the AIG bailout, saying it was an illegal taking. The way they bailed him out, which was essentially a dilution of shareholders, the government, the federal government owning most of AIG, diluting shareholders like Mr. Greenberg and others.
He was among the largest shareholders.
He was the largest shareholder, I believe, at the time through an entity called CV Star. We don't have to get into all that. But he said he was the government essentially illegally took his shareholder value and basically misappropriated it. There was private sector solutions. He sued. It's before a federal claims court. A lot of people on Wall Street think Hank, during this trial, did very well. We do know this.
Yeah, we're waiting for that decision to come down. Could be any day,
This is the key. What Greenberg's lawyers are saying is that they expect a decision by the end of the month, that this thing is coming down very soon. Wall Street sources I talked to, this is people on Wall Street, they've been closely watching this, and I'll tell you why in a second, give Greenberg anywhere from a 30 to 50% chance of winning. And if he does win, I think it's 50.
Right. We've had this discussion. You say 50-50, I say 60-40.
You're the investor out there. You're the guy out there that wants to know how this impacts you. Here's how. One, shares of AIG will tank on that news because this is a $50 billion lawsuit. That doesn't mean he gets all the money all at once, but he basically this thing gets kicked to the appellate courts and probably the Supreme Court at some point. But watch for shares of AIG to slide if Greenberg wins. If Greenberg wins, watch for shares of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to soar, to spike sharply. Why is that? There are similar cases about illegal taking through their bailouts being fought right now in the courts, the same sort of courts, the federal claims courts. So those shares should go up dramatically. And one other thing, the bailout model that was created by Hank Paulson, then the Treasury Secretary in 2008, Tim Geithner, then the New York Fed president, and Ben Bernanke, then the head of the Federal Reserve, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. That bailout model will be thrown into question. That bailout model, no matter what they say about too big to fail, still stands. It involves guarantees, throwing the monkey wrench at the banking system, and essentially government takeovers, basically government owning stock in these entities. That bailout model gets put into question because it's been deemed illegal. Remember what they did? They went in, they said they had no time, and they basically bought the company. They bought AIG. Hank said, you can't do that unless you go to our board, and say, listen, we've exhausted all the measures before we bail out before we dilute all your shareholders, and essentially they didn't. They didn't. They said they had to work fast. Hank said if they took a deep breath, they could have got a private sector company to come in and help them with it.
He says it could have been either a private sector company or a sovereign debt fund that had billions.
But
I mean, you look at
I will say
many of these in the Middle East.
I followed the case throughout. This judge, it's in the federal claims court, seemed to suggest he was siding with Hank. Was very questioning of the government. Now, we'll see. This is a huge story. If Hank loses, it's still a big story. Not as big, but if Hank wins, this thing is sort of nuclear. I mean, it will throw into question the way the federal regulators do bailouts. It'll cause Fannie Mae shares to soar. It's at $2. I could see them going to 10. I mean, who knows? And AIG shares will tank.
Okay, so let's remember, AIG shares around $62 a share right now. You guys remember this because we could see this in just a matter of weeks. Charlie.
Or days. I mean, listen, it could come out tomorrow. I don't think it's going to come out this week. That's not the guidance the lawyers for Hank are given. They're given by the end of the month. So stay tuned. This is going to be a big story.
Charlie, thank you very much.